We're here today to present to you about our ideas for globalization to China and why we should move our R&D operations overseas. We're going to give you an overview of a couple of key business aspects, but then we're going to primarily focus on an HR perspective, what we need to know, what we should consider, what the advantages and disadvantages are.
So, on the globalization of the perspective of a company, and HR needs to see a lot of number of things. It needs to adapt the changes, potential changes when it's moved from the US to China, and it needs to go on looking onto these matters. So on the first of that, it is why. We first need to understand that there are a lot of companies that has their R&D in presence in China, like the transportation, the aviation, the pharmaceuticals, the manufacturing, and a lot. So the significant trend that we propose, that we follow, but not without a careful considerations, that is we need to follow, but we need to be aware of all the odds and events, because this is a new place with a different economy, different culture, different people. So we need to see all those potential what are the odds and events, and before we could really jump into our new operations. But to operate successful franchises in China, but there are potential benefits are too great to ignore. So there are a lot of benefits that we really cannot ignore as we look around to open our new operations in China. So why we want to make this move? So first of all, we need to understand that why the company is, why we want to move, what are the odds in functioning from US. So the labor costs are at an all-time high domestically. So if you consider the per hour, the pay, it's much high than if you consider the China, a much more cheap labor source there. So the principles of Lean, Six Sigma, and the total productive maintenance are although the management of the company, they follow these rules. These are 3 rules that one company needs to follow if it wants to run it efficiently and effectively, but still that it won't be able to cut down their cost and be competitive in the market. And so it's better to run our company operations down in China rather than go here in the US. So there is a large demand and market in Asia. If you consider the market, it's better to go right down in Asia and look into that market. So also there is a potential the delivery time and the shipping cost of the products are more if you consider US rather than if you consider China. So it's the delivery time. If the customer wants something, the delivery time needs a much more longer time for the transportation, and it will also increase the shipping cost. So the total product cost will be more. So the board of directors are witnessing more and more of the company's competition, moving operations to Asia, enabling them to reduce their cost. So to be competitive enough with the other companies, it's better to move down to China. Also, it is one of the important thing to become a first to market product in the Asian market. So if we move down there, it will be easy to serve the customers first come first serve. So it will be better rather than from transporting. From US and managing down the operation from US. So by keeping the company operating, it can continue to provide a return for investors since we are a publicly owned company. So if you look around, the production cost will be less. With the cheap labor, automatically the product cost will be less to get a more profit. And with the more profit, it will basically, on the investor side, it will be beneficial for the investors. So looking for the investor side, it is more better to run the company there rather than going operations in the US. So we already talked about the cost of labor and the production are at all-time high in US. So all the cost of exporting is in the same boat. So looking into all these factors, it is better if we consider really the Chinese market rather than running our operations here. So before moving into the Chinese market, we should really understand the background of the Chinese market. So we know that China has a very ancient and different history, language, culture, and on top of that, it is a communist country. So all these backgrounds are very different from the US culture. So we need to look around all those things. And despite a difficult economic climate in Europe and the United States, China's economy has continued to grow by double-digit rates over the last couple of years. So it's booming. The growth is booming. So if you consider that the economic growth, definitely it has more positive sense to grow their operations there. And with the country poised to overtake the US as the second largest global economy by 2020, and it's remained to be like the same in the next decade. From a business to business perspective, we need to understand how to get into this large and complex market before really get into the system. So why China? So first of all, we need to understand that it is really close to the market. So if we consider the Asian market running operations down from US, it's better to get close into the market to understand the market views, the market reactions, the market philosophy, how it's running down. So it's better to go inside the market rather than going outside and running from the operations there. And attract new customers using a native sales force. So with cheap labor and taking the skilled workforce, the ITs and all. So it will be better to narrow down the production cost, and to that the less production means increased profit, and the increased profit means and the production, when the production is also less, so the sales, it will trigger the sales, and when the sales is more, so it will attract more new customers rather than running the operations there where the production cost is high, so sales will be less, and so we can draw really the customer target will be more if we take our operations down to China. And it's really, we cannot ignore the market size. So from like the US China Business Council, they have found that it's really huge, around 350 billions. So from the operational cost, we all know that the labor is cheap there, and so it's very easy to bring back our product back to home, or to sell into a secondary market like the Asia. And the raw materials and the supplies are also cheaper in China. So, but we need to be very cautious because the raw materials and the supplies, we should to be very. It's a most challenging part, because it's to be maintain the minimum criteria of our product line. So we need not to be negotiate with the raw materials. So it needs to be a basic level, a basic standard. So it's a major challenge to find out a great supplier in China. And from the equipment, equipment cost is also low in China. But again, the same thing, that the hurdle is here to know the equipment efficiency, how long it will go, and how efficient it is if you compare with the US equipment. So these are the two things that you need really. We need to look around if we go and start up a business there. With the tax are more lenient. So according to the regulations, so if we earn a profit in China and take this money back to US and invest in some operations, the taxes there is no implementation in the taxes. From the environmental cost, the regulations are very flexible in China. If you consider from the environmental perspective, like a nature, so it is not that good. But if you consider from the from the company's perspective, all those lenient regulations are really beneficial to run a company, to run the business, because although the noise, the water, the air, and the solid deposits, they have the same kind of regulations, but the density and the emission flow, the flow of all those emissions, like on the per stack basis on a particular height, has no limitations. And also the air pollution emission and the annual air pollution emission has no limitation on that side. So it is more easy to go with this environmental cost. And the next, from the HR perspective, Victor will say about.
So what are our high-level goals for our HR department as we look forward to expanding to China? First off, our main goal should be hiring locals. This cuts down on our relocation fees to move high-level execs or managers over to China to kickstart this process. And by hiring locals, we get immediate insight into the language and the market and the culture of our surrounding area. Hiring someone locally, not just of the Chinese people, but hyper-local to the area, will really help us get off on the right foot. We want to capitalize on an educated workforce. Companies are looking to capitalize on the strong ability of the Chinese to do research and their technical ability. But this also allows us to tap into, like we mentioned before, that innate local area taste, the trends and the tastes of the Chinese consumer. And then also we have this phenomenon known as haizhu, which is the idea that a lot of these Chinese people are going abroad and studying abroad and broadening their horizons in education and then bringing it back to their hyper-local area to help build up that area. And we want to tap into this phenomenon and strongly encourage it and use that to help build up our name and our brand and our company abroad. So some of the potential business risks that we have are our utilities costs. It's highly variable. Our utilities will be more or less monitored and dictated by the Chinese government. And the government is a little more volatile than the U.S. government, and that's definitely a risk that we need to take into account. So also land, we can purchase the rights to land, which lasts 50 years, and we can sell that off at any time, but it is a slightly stickier situation than what we have here in the U.S. So we don't outright own the land, we own the rights to the land. Intellectual property, knockoffs are a huge issue in China. That's why we mentioned before becoming first to market to gain market share. So this is definitely a concern, but I think it's well worth the risk. It's just the nature of the business of moving abroad. Importing used equipment is kind of very difficult to do, and that's why we want to purchase local equipment. Chinese customs are very, very strict on operating equipment that we bring in, and they're put through a myriad of tests that end up costing a lot more. So the potential risks from an HR perspective. There are plenty of legal differences. There's no bar association there, and so resolution of legal issues, it can be really challenging. And it's exceptionally challenging when we have to deal with the government. The government is kind of has their hand in every business in one way, shape, or form. And so if we don't know what we're doing, it's very easy for us to butt heads against the government. And without a bar association, it becomes increasingly difficult to fight these legal issues that we might find ourselves in. The government, we really want to develop a good relationship between our general manager and the government. That's why we mentioned before we want to hire local talent. Having someone local that speaks the language, that knows the customs, allows us to get into these conversations and make the best out of it. It prevents us from engaging unfavorably with the government that we're interacting with. And then finally, employee retention is a risk. With new companies like us wanting to come in there and open up shop, it drives up costs. The cost is still relatively low compared to domestic costs, but still to be aware of that and to be agile enough to adjust for competition is definitely a key we should consider. And then finally, employees aren't bashful to demand more. If they don't get more, they're more than happy to move on because the opportunities that foreign companies have offered them. The turnaround rate currently is averaging about 3 years, and we definitely think we can do a little better than that by staying on top of this trend. Continuing on with the risk, there are language and cultural barriers. So these key positions should definitely bridge this gap. Our management should be able to converse fluently and be able to engage with our everyday employees. And also holidays, that's something that is part of that happiness that can be generated at work. We need to be aware of that, and they're different than ours, and so depending on our timelines and deadlines, that's definitely something to be considered. Also, there will be hidden extra costs. Like I said, the government is heavily regulating, and not really regulating, but involved in the process over there. So they have government-mandated consultants that we have to pay for out of pocket, and that's just a cost that isn't as straightforward, but definitely needs to be accounted for. Finally, safety. Safety is something that we need to be aware of. Apple and other such large companies have come across these types of issues. The Chinese people love efficiency and therefore try to find shortcuts to a process, which can negate some of our safety measures. So we need to put something in place to ensure that our safety measures are carried out to the greatest extent to ensure our public image. And then finally, currency. The currency exchange between here and China is different, but also the currency in China fluctuates quite a bit more than the U.S. dollar, and so we need to be well aware of that also. So finally, in conclusion, we think that the benefits of expanding to China, like our company has talked about so often, is too great to not consider and too great to ignore. And of course, there are many positive factors on the business end, but also there are positives to the HR side. But we do want to bring up some things, some key takeaways for you guys to be aware of the potential risks. So for the next steps, I think our HR department, we want to build and find relationships with local personnel to scope out talent and to put those talents in place before we move forward with getting there. We want to find consultants that are familiar with the legal and governmental climate of the country, not just overall in theory, but currently and as it is now. And then finally, we want to team up our HR department here with the foreign HR department to see if we can bridge any knowledge gaps that we currently have. So thank you so much for your time.
Thank you.